Good evening and welcome back to the Committee of the Whole meeting for Wednesday, July 12th. We are reconvening at 7:54. And at this point, we're moving on to our next item. We took a brief recess and we're moving on to item 5.4, 2024 budget introduction. Kevin, CAO Scoble.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll introduce this and turn it over to Leanna, who has a PowerPoint for you. But kicking it off here, improving financial practices, processes, and policies to achieve fiscal sustainability is consistent with Council's strategic plan, and many initiatives were put before you in 2022, and a number have been put forward to you so far this year. So the agenda this evening, as we've seen, is packed with further fiscal sustainability initiatives. And one of these is the item before you, introduction to the 2024 budget. So while significant improvements were made to the budgeting practices and processes last year, the continuous improvement theme will continue into this year's. So some of the improvements we'll be talking about for your consideration this evening include a multi-year capital and operating budgets to contribute to the predictability that Council desires, introduction of a long-term capital plan, defined transfer to reserves, should Council adopt the reserve policy that was put before you this evening, and identification of forthcoming impacts to the budget, such as the RCMP increases with growth over the funding envelope threshold expected in future years with the next census, so that we can undertake proper planning and timing now instead of reacting to it when these things happen. So further sequenced improvements coming in future years include identification of the utility surplus that requires further discussion in future years' budget on how to treat it, utilization of services and service levels inventory approved by Council from which administration builds future budgets. That's also the first step in priority-based budgeting if that is a future direction that Council wants to go. And then the asset management program that we've talked about before, the development of it will help establish the forecast reserve requirements consistent with the reserve policy put before you this evening. So with that, I'll turn it over to Leanna for a more fulsome presentation of these concepts, plans, and processes forthcoming in this year's budgeting process.
Well, thank you, CAO Scoble. So good evening, Your Worship and Council, as we continue on our journey tonight. I'm here tonight with Tom to present to you the 2024 budget introduction. We were here earlier this year presenting budget timelines to you, and now we're returning back to you to talk to you about some of the strategies that we're recommending on incorporating into our 2024 budget. We will start with the background of why we actually come here to present the Council a budget for you to adopt. Under Section 242 of the Municipal Government Act, a council must adopt an operating budget in each calendar year or may adopt an interim operating budget for the part of a calendar year. Under Section 243, subsection 3 of the Municipal Government Act, the estimated revenue and transfers under subsection 2 must be at least sufficient to pay the estimated expenditures and transfers of subsection 1. So basically, you must have a balanced budget. So under section 244, subsection 3, for if any given year a municipality has a shortfall referred to in subsection 1, the minister may, if the minister considers it necessary to do so, establish that a municipality's annual budget for the next calendar year, and that annual budget, A, is for the purpose of the municipal's annual budget for that calendar year, and B, may not be amended. So what we do is we bring a proposed budget for you guys to adopt. So the minister does not step in and tell us how we are going to run things for our community. So within the 2024 budget, we'll be working with our budget owners to develop a 4-year operating financial plan for 2024 to 2027. So the 2024 year upon Council's resolution becomes the operating budget. 2025 to 2027, I'm sorry, I have to keep up with flipping slides too, will be accepted for information. Then when we move into our capital financial plan, that'll be a presentation of 2024 through 33. Council will adopt through resolution the 2024 capital budget. The 25 through 2023 will be forecasting balances, or forecasting projects for council, and administration will also bring forward to you basically what our anticipated reserve balances will be and our proposed estimation of what we are foreseeing with what our grants may be. And of course, our crystal ball isn't as always clear. And with the changing of different levels of government, provincial and federal, these things do change. And this is why we come back to you on a regular basis and give you updates on a quarterly basis. So council's role is to be the pulse of the community, adopting strategic plans, identify priorities of the community, and clarify what they want to see as outcomes. Administration's role recommends based on collective professional knowledge, allocates resources that align with our priorities, is competent and effective in delivering services, and is an efficient use of taxpayers' dollars. Oh, see, I fell behind on my slides again. So within our policy, we have our budget policy, or we will hopefully bring back to you at a later date our guiding principles for our budget. We have our council strategic plan, we have the MDP, we have our department plans. We're also working on the IDP and also our land use bylaw. We also have our financial reserve that is going to show us how what our long-term financial stability and flexibility is. And as we've discussed earlier this evening, the budget and taxation guidelines policy will be bringing you back potentially later this year. Throughout the budget, we are going to do a review of previous budgets. We're going to do analysis on trends of what our expenditures have been. We're going to be looking at our reserve balances, what they were, what we spent them on, and where we're looking at going in the future. We're looking at managing our long-term debt. What is smart debt compared to irresponsible debt? And I'm not saying any of our debt is irresponsible, but we want to ensure that we give you the best guidance that we can on using our debt. And then our last part of our budget is always our inflationary costs, so cost of personnel and cost of living allowance. Now I'm going to turn it over to Tom to talk to you about some of the comparators.
Yeah, I'll just go over some of the kind of key things that we'll be addressing in the budget, and these are things that we talked about a fair bit during the past budget process and with the property tax bylaw. So we had the 4.6% tax increase for last year. That worked out to about $149, almost $150 for an average household. And last year we had a 1% tax increase. I think it was 198,000 was our kind of magic number. And as we work through this year's budget, a 1% tax increase will be $208,000 because again, we saw that 4 to 5% increase in tax revenue. Just some comparators with some other communities. This relates to our percentage of our total assessment value in town. So the valuation of homes, businesses, all properties in the community, and how they compare to some of the other communities. So we're currently 83% of our assessment is made up of residential assessment, where 17% is from commercial or industrial. And that's fairly comparable to, say, the Calgary region. As you can see, Okotoks, sorry, this isn't a little bit bigger. Okotoks at 86%, High River at 84%, Cochrane 89%, Chestermere's at 95%. So they're primarily residential. And then we threw in a few other, say, similar communities that are kind of in the area and maybe similar in size. Lacombe is similar in size. They're pretty close to where we are. And then we have a few others that we kind of look at, Olds, Brooks, and Drumheller. And you can see they have definitely a bit more commercial industrial. And there's various reasons why. I think with the case of Drumheller, they've got the prison there. That's a big tax financial support for their community. And the same with Olds, maybe with the college and other things there. So again, as CEO Scoble's vision is that we definitely focus on increasing our amount of industrial and commercial, and that's a long-term strategy. And how do we put the right measures in place through development processes and that to encourage that, because you definitely gain a whole lot of additional tax dollars and support for keeping taxes more in line with for residential properties if you have that support of a good industrial base. The next, that didn't move. Oh. Next slide is a very similar slide, but this looks at, as opposed to assessment value, it looks at taxes. So what percentage of our tax revenue comes from the residential sector versus the industrial commercial sector? And you can see in our case, 80% of our tax revenue comes from residential, 20% comes from industrial commercial. And the reason is we have a slightly higher industrial commercial tax rate, which is about 23% higher in 2022 than our residential tax rate. So we have a slightly higher increase. So you see other communities like Okotoks, High River, Airdrie, where they were probably in the 80+% when you looked at it from an assessment perspective, but they have a higher commercial tax rate. So again, just looking at how that impacts the amount of tax revenue and the percentage that comes from each of those sectors. So in the case of, I know, Lacombe, they were like 83%, 82% on the assessment value, but 72% of their tax revenue comes from residential. The reason is their commercial tax rate is double what their residential tax rate, which is not uncommon. Of the 107 towns in Alberta, the average is almost exactly 2 times higher for the commercial. So we're at an advantage. So you can look at it, say, with our commercial tax rate much lower than the average out there, and how does that support in our recruitment and getting community or getting businesses located here. So again, these are things that there seems to be no consistency amongst municipalities on where they set that allocation of commercial versus residential rate, but this kind of just gives you a kind of a high-level summary. One thing that we've talked a lot about recently with council is our municipal debt limits. So you can see Strathmore is in blue, and the other 107 towns that in the Alberta are in orange. So you can see that we definitely saw an increase between 2005 and 2020, where we went from probably 23% in 2016 up to 51% of our debt. So again, we had a number of big projects that we took on, but now we're paying those down, and you can see that blue line going down. And I've got another chart coming up that'll forecast that out in the future. And how do we compare? So we saw a little bit of an increase last couple of years in other communities, debt going up, but we're also seeing them go down too. I think a lot of communities during COVID, I think to spur economic, I guess, keeping businesses and construction companies up and operating and keeping the economy going, a lot of communities really focused on ensuring that their capital projects were going ahead in keeping the economy flowing. So I kind of expected that would come down, and we've seen other communities now starting to drop after a 1 or 2 year increase. So we're kind of average now, or we're going to be average this year. And that's a good trend because that at least gives council capacity for the future. If there are projects that you need to rely on debt for to get through, we've got that capacity and managing that with the capital budget. Just another comparison, debt to per capita. So we're fairly good on that standpoint. Definitely other communities are lower. Olds is definitely on the high side. They've got I think their broadband, they've always talked about over the last number of years where they've invested a lot in their community on their fiber optic network. I think that put a lot of debt on their community. So you can see on their perspective, or from their debt limits, that's putting a burden, but they probably have a strategy of paying that down. So again, that might look negative to them, but there's probably strategies on how they're managing that. So just another indicator that we'll look at. And this is kind of just back to our financial reserves. What are we putting away last year we put away $4 million, and I think we talked about that quite a bit with council here a few months ago. A lot of that was from last year's surplus, but also surpluses from the year before too. So we put aside a lot of our excess dollars into reserves to get those balances back up. But you can see in 2021, 2020, the amount that we were putting into reserves for capital projects and the like was quite low. And then this year's budget, we're about 1.5 million. We'll be working with council on really strategizing how do we increase that in the coming years. As CEO Scoble had mentioned, we'll talk a little bit about utilities. And this is one thing that we'll get into with council when we really look at the operating budget this year, is that we're taking in about $11 million a year in revenue through utilities. So that's water, wastewater, stormwater, and solid waste. Operating expenses, say for the past 4 years, in around the $8 million range. So we generate an annual surplus in the $3 million range. We should be focusing, putting a lot of that dollars into reserves because I think as Councillor Langmaid said, a lot of our infrastructure, whether it's water, sewer, is older and needs. That was Councillor Peterson. Sorry, faux pas. Sorry, I knew it was on that side of the table, but what's that? I just don't want to take credit. Okay, and again, reinvesting that back in. So this is something that isn't going to. We're going to have to really take a look at this with council, strategize as a team on that, and really put a focus on this of getting more dollars into our reserves so that way it's being invested back into water, wastewater, and stormwater in particular, because those are the hundreds of millions of dollars in assets that we have there that need continual replacement. So again, something we'll talk a lot about in the coming months. And just totally different chart here, just looking at the CPI. So we know for like the last 10 years, CPI has been very low in that 1% to 2% range. So you can see that in 2018, 19, and 20. Creeping up last year, or actually creeping up in 2021 to 3%, and then last year in around the 7% range. And now it's hovering around 4%. So will we see that trend coming down? Because that really is going to impact our budget and driving our costs. And a lot of our projects are impacted probably by higher than inflation because of construction costs for materials and supplies, whether it's a road maintenance or a road replacement program or underground infrastructure where we have to get piping and stuff like that. We're seeing a lot of increases above and beyond inflation. I know there's a number of municipalities, and CEO Scoble probably knows more about this than I do, is there's a number of municipalities out there that do a municipal price index. So they kind of look at the basket of goods that municipalities buy and how does that compare to CPI. So we'll do a little bit more investigation, and we'll probably bring back some information for council in the fall on that of how are municipalities impacted by price increases compared to the average homeowner or business out there. So, and that's kind of just some of the highlights from the comparisons, and I'll let Leanna talk about the next few slides.
Thank you, Tom. So as we've talked at great lengths with growth in our community, we have to abide by the municipal development plan. Then we have our area structure plans, our outline plan for our communities, and our development agreements. These are all set basically by our offsite levy bylaws that we have brought in front of council in the past. I believe that we are working on updating one here in the near future. And so that will be brought in front of council for perusal and final adoption. Through all the growth, we do see some new property tax growth. We do also see some growth in some of our expenditures, supplying new services to these new developments. And of course, that is always split between residential and non-residential. So now getting into our financial plan process for our 2024 budget. So back in May, I think it was late May, early June, we brought back a memo to you, council, on our financial plan. This also supplied council with some of our budget timelines. We're going to do training throughout our budget team, so all of our operational people. We're then going to revise financial policies, and of course, we'll bring those back to council for approval. Tonight, we classified this almost as a council workshop, a little bit of discussion on where we're going with the budget. Coming up over the summer, we're going to do, through administration, review of capital projects that will be researched and reviewed. We'll be doing the review of our operating and bringing that back, of course, to council. Also, we always look at our human capacity and our our IT requirements through what we need to support our staff to do their jobs correctly. We will look at our fees and charges for operational fees and charges, our capital projects, our operating plans that'll be reviewed with the departments. We will then be bringing those back to have discussions with senior leadership to see what cuts the mark. Is this what we agree with? Senior leadership is much closer with you guys. With council, you have much more open to conversations of what you guys want to see, what your ear is to the ground with the community. You hear what the community wants. Basically, every second year we're planning on doing a citizen satisfaction survey. In October, we'll also be going out to our community groups that we fund, and they'll bring them back for presentations here with council. We'll then be doing operating plans reviewed and revised through senior leadership prior to bringing them back to council for our workshops to kind of have deliberations, get more instruction of what you guys want to see, what you'd like, what you dislike within that before we bring it back for final.
So in August of 23, is that when the opportunity for council suggestions on things they'd like to see in capital projects? How is that process occurring?
I believe I'd looked that up this morning for Kara, and I believe that was late August, September.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you.
Off top of my head, I don't have it in front of me.
That's okay. Councillor Langmaid.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just before I ask my question, I do believe, if I remember correctly, it was August 18th was the due date for those, unless it's changed. I'm looking for some clarification on the citizen satisfaction survey. It's biannual. I know we've done one last year and the year before. Are we doing another one this year?
No, we're not doing one this year. We're doing it next year. We did one last year. You guys gave us instructions that you didn't want to see one, so we're not,
Okay, thank you. I saw it listed under October 2023 as a to-do item. I just wanted to clarify. Thank you.
No, that is correct. I probably should have removed that and moved it back into 2024. So then, of course, going through with senior leadership, we'll be doing many revisions back and forth, doing some recalculations prior to bringing it back to council for deliberations. I'll tell you, last year, being part of the budget process with you guys was amazing. How open you guys were. You asked questions, and there was no question that was a dumb question.
That's nice to hear. Thank you for that, for those comments for council. I appreciate that.
I found last year's budget deliberations was one of the easier ones. It was more open. There was never, oh, I can't tell them that, or I better not ask that. You know what? We're a team. We
Thank
can
you
work
very
on this
much.
together.
I have a question or comment from Councillor Wiley, then Councillor Mitzner.
Sorry, so council submissions for budget is August 18th? Is there going to be a call out for that or communicated to us? Yeah, that'll come to us.
Yes, that is correct. That'll be probably coming out within, I'm going to say, in the next month or so. I keep forgetting it's already middle of July. So, but yes, that'll be coming out in the next while here.
Councillor Mitzner.
Okay, so I'm just looking for a little bit of clarification because we're discussing budgets, we're discussing long-term debt. Nowhere have we ever completed the process to determine what our net worth is with our assets in the community. So if, for example, we got into a problem and we had a piece of property we could sell and we could utilize it for debt, we need to know, any business that operates needs to know what their inventory is. We have a binder with some photos in it, but we have no net worth.
CAO Scoble, can you give them a little bit of an update on the asset management?
It's in the corporate business plan scheduled to come forward by December of this year. It takes some time to build all that information.
Thank you.
Thank you, CAO Scoble. Thank you, Councillor Mitzner. Carry on, Liana.
So as we're going through the repeat and presenting to council with deliberations, there's always an opportunity to ask questions. Administration will respond to your questions, and we're planning on bringing back the budget for deliberation and adoption beginning of December. So part of this financial plan process is the CAO informs senior leadership of the budget mandate. Staff members prepare the operating and capital budgets. Staff members continue working on their budgets with their directors, managers, and of course with finance. Finance goes back to the senior leadership team, basically with everything rolled up. We continue to review with the senior leadership. Senior leadership works with CAO Scoble, and then finance prepares the presentation for council. My apologies, I've just got to get to my notes here. So one of the things that we need to remember, our overarching goals within this budget process is financial sustainability. Remember the use, this is public dollars. This is not our dollars, these are our residents' dollars. We need to be watching or paying attention to our level of service. We're in the process of the review, and this is going to be a 2 to 3 year project. We're not going to be able to sit down, lock ourselves in a room for two days in a week, next week, and be able to come back to council with this. This is going to take some time to prepare. And of course, we're going to try and tie our budget to our asset management. And as CAO Scoble mentioned that we're planning on bringing this back to you in December. So one of the things that finance will be doing, and I'm sure we've talked about this, is we're going to be looking at our budgets versus actuals. Right now, we're doing a significant amount of cleanup to ensuring that we are putting our expenses in the right buckets. So I know Tom and the rest of the finance team are working diligently with every budget owner to reviewing their budgets, ensuring that we're got everything allocated correctly. We're looking at potentially setting a target of having 1.5% of our total budget going into reserves. Of course, this is council's decision. If council decides they want 5%, 2%, this is a council decision. This is not administration's decision. We're also, as Tom has mentioned, we're looking at our debt management, making sure that we're following all of our financial policies, and we're looking at the growth of the community. Now I'm going to turn it back over to Tom to talk about the RCMP.
I get the exciting slides. So as Councilor CAO Scoble had mentioned, made me do it. One of the big things, and I've seen this over and over, where municipalities all of a sudden, we hit our 15,000 population threshold. And I think probably council's aware that once we hit that threshold, we go from picking up 70% of the RCMP costs to 90%. So it might not sound like a big increase, but that's 20% will work out to roughly $1 million. So as you can see, currently in this year's budget, we had $2.7 million for RCMP contract, and we're forecasting once, if our population is over 15,000, and it probably will be on the next census in 2026, that we will see a big increase in 2028 and 2029 and be in the range of 4.1 million. So that's a 1.4 million increase, or about a 50% increase to our contract. And this is one of the bigger contracts that we have, if not the biggest contract in our budget. So we don't want to get stuck with all of a sudden, oh, in 2028, we've got a 3 to 4% tax increase. That's like if you're trying to, say, do a 2 or 3% just inflationary increase that year, this would be over and above it. So, I mean, that's why we got to start thinking about this now. How do we ramp that up? So we've got a few strategies that I will be meeting with the senior leadership team on. Leanna and I will be, and we'll talk about how can we kind of phase this in. Again, it's going to be something that's going to hit our dollars or hit our bottom line each year, but how can we gradually allow this to occur rather than a one-time, all of a sudden, boom, 4% tax increase, which nobody wants to see, because if you've got a regular, say, 2% increase that same year, you're talking a 6 or 7% increase. Residents probably aren't going to be too happy about that, along with trying to get money into reserves and that. So again, we've got a lot of challenges that are going to be facing the budget, but this is one that we really want to get ahead of. And we thought, hey, let's bring it forward to council so you just know the magnitude of it, and then we can come back with some recommendations as part of the budget.
Thank you, Tom. Questions from Councillor Langmaid and then Councillor Mitzner?
Thank you very much. It kind of harkens back to one of the previous documents we looked at this evening with a question that I didn't end up asking, but I'll ask now. And that's that I noticed that there was no financial reserve that spelled out RCMP. And I was wondering if, given this anticipated increase in costs and the fact that we are trying to plan for the future, would it be beneficial if one of those reserves did consider the RCMP? We have a separate reserve for fire, and that's kind of what ticked the question for me, is we have a reserve for fire, but we don't, I know operating and capital and all of that plays into it, but I'm just wondering if we put any thought into RCMP.
Yes, we have. We have two, I have two options that I've kind of drafted that I'll review with Leanna, and then we'll present to senior leadership. One of them is involving reserves. So again, how do we structure that? So we'll definitely be coming back during budget, and if that's determined to be the best course moving forward, that would be something that we'd consider having.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Mitzner, thank you.
I just have a question in relationship to the contract. So the increased population, the increased cost, does this increase the members of the detachment? Do we get
No, so
extra members?
No, this is status quo of 16 members that we have right now. So this is for no increase in going to 17 members or beyond. So this is sticking with 16 members that we're currently at. Good question.
Mark?
If I may, Your Worship, the funding model, as Tom said, doesn't change once you reach that limit, but the policing priorities and their multi-year funding may influence the number of members that we may have assigned to Strathmore. The multi-year plan has us going up to a 16th member based on our population, things like that, but the funding formula doesn't change necessarily. The other thing that Tom, that doesn't factor in is now then the maintenance of the actual building itself becomes a responsibility of the municipality as well. So those are the big lots of balls out there.
Is the maintenance included in that amount?
No, it isn't. I had not actually known that before, but I'm also I've also, where I've been in other communities, they've owned the RCMP detachment, where I think here it's federally owned. So again, you get those mixes. So that might be something unique that if we have to take on the maintenance, then we'll have to figure out what additional costs that will be.
But that then doesn't become our asset? We just have to increase our maintenance costs and looking after the building, but no asset?
That's correct, Your Worship.
Okay, thank you. Carry on, Tom.
Yeah, some of the really positive things that we're looking at to really enhance, like CEO Scopel said, we're continually looking to make improvements to the budget process. And one of the key areas is in the capital budget and in getting in front of council long-range plans. And some of that will tie in with the asset management plans that will be coming back. But there's some of the ones that we can work on without that information is just looking at our fire fleet and equipment, looking at our IT, looking at our recreation facilities, buildings, looking at our fleet for operations. There's tens of millions of dollars in vehicles and equipment that we have, and making sure that we're getting that before council in that 10-year capital budget to make sure that that we got a grader worth $1 million coming up in 5 years' time or whatever, and getting that before council so it's not where did this come from on the budget and how are we going to fund that? So again, that long-term strategy on what are our assets worth. And I'll have some funding charts coming up here that will also kind of give us some historical perspective and then some forecasting to the futures. And then Leanna will chat a little bit about the prioritization matrix. So I just want to give if I can get this to move. Kind of small, but this is kind of some of the modeling that we're doing, and this is, say, fire, where we're actually listing all their vehicles, when they were purchased, when they need to be replaced. Do they need to be replaced 15 years out, 20 years out, 25 years out? Putting dollar amounts in those so we have them identified in the year, and then determining how much reserves or how many dollars or what do we need to be putting aside to make sure that we're funding, say, in this case, fire, over the next 25 years. And that's such a powerful tool that's so easy, but is often neglected. So we'll have this all before council, and this is just a sample of ones that we'll be doing for a lot of areas. So it's just used for example, based on what I've used before. So there's no real live Strathmore data on here. So if you're looking at numbers or equipment, it's not related to us yet. But Fire Chief I was going to say Fire Chief Dave. I showed him this, and he showed me his, and I'm like, were we using the same thing? So he's already drafted it, almost identical to what I've used in the past. So that was great to see. So we're in complete alignment, and we'll be working with, say, Donna that was here. I was chatting with her earlier today about working on their plans. So. And just kind of showing our debt schedule for the next 10 year, or yeah, next 10 close to 10-year period. Just as we saw earlier with some of the charts that I had for other communities, how we compare. And this is just based on our current debt. So we're currently paying out about $2.7 million this year in debt principal and debt interest. And we can see that's gradually reducing. In particular, by 2028, our debt is about $1.3 million lower that we'll be spending money out. So what can we utilize that? Because a lot of communities often say, oh, we paid off that debt, let's spend it on programs, services, and it gets lost. But how can we be very strategic and very precise on, okay, we got some savings here, where do we earmark those dollars for? And we can use that for our advantage. So I just wanted to kind of give some of the things here that administration will be looking at and coming back with council as part of our budgeting for capital in particular over the next 10 years in these savings, and how do we reinvest? It doesn't mean like if we have more debt, yeah, that's going to impact things, but just based on what we know currently, this is kind of where our debt situation is going for the next 8 to 9 years. And the last slide I have is I think going back to Councillor Langmaid's I think question earlier on grants and that. And I spent a fair bit of time going over our grant situation from 2009 to 2022, and you can see on average over that time period, we probably had, for grants being the top 3 grants there, the MSI, the CCBF, and the Basic Municipal Transportation Grant, we're probably taking on average $3.8 million a year from those 3 capital grants. And that's fairly consistent to what I'm used to in the past. They got rid of the Basic Municipal Transportation Grant about 3 years ago. We've seen reductions in MSI grants, and we haven't seen much of an increase in the CCBF grant. And those are our core grants for our capital. You can see for this year, from those 3 grants, because one of them's not there, down to 2 grants, we're only going to be taking in $2.2 million approximately. So definitely a huge decrease from historical trends. And where are they going to go in the future? And that's getting that and trying to identify it. I've put in there for the new grant that's going to be replacing the MSI grant, almost $2 million for next year. I don't know if Kevin has a better guess on that. I don't know. But just looking at the funding that's available for that grant, if it's consistent to what we currently have, we should be in that $2 million range, but we don't know the formula that the province is going to be using.
Tom, there's no federal grant to soften the blow for towns that hit that 15,000. Like, there's no transition grant to help them deal with any of that.
I've never heard of one,
Okay.
and I think in the last 25 years, I've I've seen a lot of municipalities hit that mark, and I think they all hope, oh, maybe the process will change or the threshold for population will increase. But the Airdries, the Chestermeres, Canmore this past year, they've all hit that threshold at some point in time, and the model and the population has never changed. So,
Okay,
and
thank you.
there's no soften the blow federally
Thanks.
for that. And typically we get some other grants. I've just kind of done some estimates for those, so you can kind of see where maybe over the last, if we're putting, say, what we're putting away this year for reserves, 1.5 million. We typically are probably putting in the past, having $1.7 million approximately for capital projects. This year we're only going to be probably $4 million. I think we put our budget at $3 million because we didn't want to overextend ourselves. We're probably going to have a slightly bigger capital budget this year because of some items coming in. But you see it kind of growing up a little bit, not because of grants, but because of funding that we put in. So as I showed on that slide before, if we utilize the reduction in grants to increase our transfer to reserves, you can see that has a huge impact on our organization. So going from $1.5 million in reserves, as we pay less and less towards debt and pay less and less towards interest, we can increase our transfer to reserves, the amount of money that we're putting in reserves, without increasing taxes and using it as pay as you go. Like we're funding the programs and capital projects that are before us with dollars that we currently have. So again, some big strategies, conceptual things to think about, but things that we want to just kind of get before council as we hash these out down the road. And as CEO Scoble said before about also looking at for reserves is do you do like a lot of communities, and I've been seen in the past where maybe you do a certain percent allocation strictly for infrastructure reinvestment. So again, a great strategy that a lot of communities have done, and you build that up over time and not have it as a one-time hit. You just gradually build it in. And I'll turn it back to Leanna to wrap up.
I feel very short again. Well, I just wanted to take a pause here. Previously, you asked when some of the items were coming back to council. So the budget requests for what you guys want to see within the budgets, that deadline that was presented to you guys within our timelines for our budget is August 18th. The budget information request, when you're looking at the budgets that you've seen, because remember last year we brought them back to you November 1st, you had an opportunity to look at them and then ask some questions before we got into a lot of budget deliberations. That due date is November 6th. Oh, sorry, that was November 10th. I couldn't read Kara's handwriting. My apologies. So the next item that we have that we want to bring to reintroduce within the budget process is last year was the first year that you guys had the capital project prioritization matrix. So out of our learnings from the capital project and prioritization matrix is we found that there was a lot of ways that we could have biased opinions within them. So what we've done this year is what we're recommending to council, and the next report after this report is on this, is we've simplified this so there's going to be a project category that is going to have a weighting of 20%, and the essential project is going to have a higher rating than what I believe, a priority project or efficiency or cost savings. So essential would definitely be higher than what a efficiency or cost-saving project.
Your worship, may I ask a question? Yes. Thank you. I'm just wondering, this is a prioritization matrix. How do you determine a priority project outside of the prioritization matrix? Like, I understand essential project, priority project, but how are you defining what a priority project is? It's my understanding that that's what the matrix is for. Or is that something different?
If I go to the next part of the presentation. So an essential project would have a maximum value of 100 in this section. And so it would get, if it was 100 out of a 20, it would get a rating of 20. It would get 20 out of 20. If it was a priority project, this category is required to maintain critical components in a state of good repair. These projects are not mandatory, but would maintain critical infrastructure at current service levels, would have a weighting of 80%
Okay,
out
so
of the
they've each got, so the answer is that they've each got defined
Yes.
definitions. Okay,
Yes, they
thank
do.
you.
So, okay. So then we have the strategic alignment, and this is where it links to your strategic plan, and that has a weighting of 10%. So if it's directly aligned, it would have a weighting of 100. If it's indirectly aligned to the strategic plan, it'd have 50%. No alignment would get a 0 weighting. And it's then weighted out of the 10% there. Then the next section would be on the business plan. We'd select from the business plan. Then it is more simplified going, is it directly related to the business plan, indirectly, or no alignment based on 150 and 0%. The next part that we've just added into this prioritization matrix is our business continuity. And this is be weighted 100% of significant impact to being able to provide the service, moderate impact 50%, low impact 10%, no impact 0, and that would have a weighting of 15%. This is so that we can provide good customer service and services to our residents. Our next one is our operating budget impact, and that has 7 different weightings. So we have significant decrease in operating costs would have a weighting of 100%. We then have 50% weighting for a moderate decrease in operating costs. Then we have marginal decrease, and they have dollar values attached to them, and that would have a weighting of 25%. Little or no impact would actually have a weighting of 0. If we see a marginal increase in our operating costs, we would actually get a negative percentage. So your overall rating of your prioritization matrix would be lower because it now has an operational impact, or a dollar. And then a moderate increase is a minus 50%, and a significant increase, you'd have a minus 100% out of the 10% of the total operational. I see a question.
Yeah, Your Worship. Thank you. I actually have 2. One is the definition for business continuity risk assessment correct there on the screen, the extent to which the project will address or mitigate risk to public health and or occupational health and safety? Or is that a copy paste?
I think that's a typo.
Okay, thank you. I could not rectify that in my head with what you said and what I saw. That makes sense. My second question is, last budget cycle, council didn't get an opportunity. We saw the final weighting of projects, but not the breakdown of how they were weighted and what they received. Is it possible for council to receive the breakdown of each ranking, just so that we can understand why something might have received a lower score than we thought?
We can provide council with that information.
That would be helpful for me. Thank you.
Then we have our financing, that it's how it's financed. Is it entirely funded from external sources? And that's worth 15%. Then we have our final 3. So we have our cost benefit, and that is able to measure a positive return on investment with payback, and that's a weighting of 10%. Then we see what is our service level impact, and that has a weighting of 10%. And that has a weighting, 100% is address a current service level deficiency, so a level of service standard is achieved. 50% weighting has increased level of service, and a 0 has no impact on service level. And our final one is our community and economic impact. And this is our impact on business and economy in terms of revenue generation. For example, job creation, assessment growth, tourism. So these weightings have a total weighting overall of 5%, but how that's broken down in this section is 100% is a significant economic benefit, which receives 100% weighting. 50% is a moderate economic benefit in the local economy, and 0 is minimal or no economic impact for the local economy. And now I could turn around and say, if you have questions, we could take them all, and if you have additional questions, we can continue with more.
I'm thinking it might be good to go on to that next one about the capital project and major initiatives priority matrix in more depth, and then there could be some questions as far as the priorities. Does that make sense to everyone?
That makes sense to me.
Okay.
I originally had requested this before this presentation, but that's okay, we can do that, so.
Okay.
Basically, as I had mentioned previously, after 1 year of use in the matrix, administration found that the projects that were not treated equitable in all fashions. This prioritization matrix simplifies the tying the weightings to council's strategic plan and business plan. This matrix tool is to assist with the asset management because the capital projects are either being refurbished, replaced, or they are new assets. This tool will assist in determining which capital projects could proceed and the timing of when that would happen. Further, these are the different categories and factors with weightings to quantify and rank the priorities. And then I said, please see chart for details. And of course, it is very tiny on my piece of paper, and I have to squint. So if we go back to, do you want me to review all of them again?
I don't think you have to review all of them again. I guess just focus on maybe specific things in this matrix that you think. Like I'm really interested. I've become quite interested in the weighting aspect of it as far as how it could apply to certain capital projects. So I don't know. I'm not sure if I'm explaining it right, but I don't think you have to recap or review things. We can just.
I believe our best way to really show you is actually bring back a capital project and show you how it all is weighted. I'm not prepared to do that tonight.
That's a really interesting thing, and that leads me to my question. Actually, is I've been thinking of different capital projects in my head that you may need as a town, but it doesn't necessarily score as high in certain things like business plan, business continuity. It could actually be negative, and I'm thinking in terms of. For example, and maybe there's a different budget line item that I'm not considering, but I'm thinking in terms of, let's say Wildflower really needed a really good playground equipment and a park, a little playground thing. It may not fit in very well with some of these categories. And then so I guess I'm trying to reconcile how do those kinds of projects get approved if they're a big capital item when they don't fulfill some of these aspects, and maybe you have that answer, Councillor CAO Scoble.
So the reality is some projects will never see the light of day using this system. That's just the way it is municipalities are always constrained for capital. You can never build everything that you want. So I mean, we've had some internal discussions and it's something we can bring back to council. Like, our thoughts are that there's 5 or 10% of the available capital budget is left as discretionary outside of this process. Part of that is we'll be asking council members to submit capital budget requests for specific projects you may want to do, like a stretch of trail that's not paved or whatever, that we haven't put in the plan. So we, again, are seeking council input, and we're still bandying that about, I guess. Is there a 5 or 10% allowance of the total funding envelope to be left for discretionary for, again, it's the reality when you take this method. This is about meeting the most pressing needs of the community, but at the same time, maybe there are some things that don't fit the template that council feels should be done, and you have that opportunity to make those happen.
I agree with you, and I think that makes a lot of sense. And again, I use the example of in the past and on our citizen satisfaction surveys and our rankings as far as recreation, pathways is way at the top, yet this year we're not doing one. And so I would love to see something like that where either a chunk of money is available for those type of projects, or a line item that's always going to be entrenched in the budget process, so that the public knows, okay, we're getting some pathways this year. We don't know where and where they're going to connect, but we know every year we're getting X amount of money spent on pathways. So yeah, I think that's great. I think that makes a lot of sense, and I understand that. So we can wait to do one of those capital things and work through the matrix. That would be great for us.
Just looking at our council schedule, we'd probably be looking in September, just due to we're halfway through July. And
Yep. No, that sounds really good. Councillor Langmaid.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think overall it looks really good. I think the only item that I'll take away and think more about is the potential for a negative score based on any increased operational cost. And I understand where that's coming from, and I understand the purpose of it. But almost any improvement has an operational impact. Like, any change you make will have an operational impact. You add a path, you have one more path you need to plow. So because it's weighted quite low, like I said, it's something I'm going to have to noodle over a little bit more just to understand it better, and maybe seeing some examples will definitely help me with that, because maybe there's another one that offsets it. And in all honesty, I haven't had enough time to sit with this to really think it through fully, but that's the only one that maybe gives me just a wee bit of pause, is that you can go negative, and it's so easy to have an operational impact with any change. And are we all, any change we make, is it going to get hit with a negative? And it's just something that, I'm not asking for any changes. It's not super critical. It's nothing like that. It's just something that I'll have to noodle over a little bit more.
so what was attached within the package in the council agenda? It tells you the dollar values and how they would get a more positive or negative rating. So.
Yes, unfortunately, at home, my printer is only black and white, so the copy that I printed out and reviewed, I can't read any of that at all, so I have to go back on my computer to look at it, which is why I just wanted to make the comment, and I'll take more time to certainly think about it and noodle it over.
So administration has looked at other organizations that have used this matrix, and this was their recommendation on basically their weightings. I know last year was the first year we used the prioritization matrix, and we're asking for some tweaks a little bit for the 2024 budget. And this will be something that we bring back basically on an annual basis to get your approval, because you may turn around saying, oh, well, business continuity is super important to us this year and it needs to be at an 80% weighting. I'm not saying that's what you're going to do, but you have that opportunity to do that.
So are you saying, I just want to clarify, are you guys saying that there's a chance to possibly even add a section? So what I'm thinking of is arts. Arts may not have a huge budget impact as far as bringing in a ton of revenue, but it does contribute to community wellness, and that's in our strategic plan. You've got community and economic impact at the bottom. Would there be opportunities for a capital project to maybe score higher in something along the lines of community wellness, where it could offset the business aspect of it? It feels like we're doing a lot of things through the business lens, which, I guess makes sense. We're a corporation. We want to be successful financially, but there are things like arts, recreation, that may not necessarily have a big economic impact or addition. Councillor Peterson.
If I can speak to that, Your Worship, I think that one of the things that we can work with local, our Chamber of Commerce and Community Futures, and with the Alberta government, all of them have matrix process that they utilize to identify arts-based supports for economic development in communities downtown, based by size, based by numbers of people coming into programming, and in terms of how that would roll out for our downtown economy. If we did that, if we applied that matrix, there's a couple. There's one under the Alberta Tourism one, which is the one I'm most familiar with. But if we applied that matrix to our downtown and we looked at the thousands of people coming into the downtown to the Wheatland Society of the Arts that they can document, that lends itself to a business plan. Likewise, the Vault catalogs people that they bring into their environment and all the tickets they sell for events and building community. That certainly lends itself to a business plan, but it's something that we haven't done. So it presents a gap in terms of this, but it's something easily remediated.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So Liana and CAO Scoble, I guess I'm just asking, is there potential for a 10th category in that chart, in that matrix, to have a wellness of the community, and then you would change a bit of your weighting to allow for that to have some matrix impact on a project that would not necessarily be a high economic one or a business one?
So we could look at that. We'll take it away, but I would also suggest, that's part of the council strategic plan, which has weighting already, right? So if it's one of council's strategic activities, because these are all at a very high level, right, as opposed to getting into functional type things like parks or recreation or what have you. So that might be, we'll take it away and look at it, but my suggestion would be I think it already fits, and it gets, I think it was 10% weighting under the strategic plan in the matrix there.
That is correct.
Yeah.
So you guys are using strat plan items as well as this, as part of an overall matrix?
Can we call that up for a minute again? So it has strategic plan there with a weighting of 10. So if it's competing against a project that's not part of council's strategic plan and vision, then it would have an advantage over it?
So you're saying that should be sufficient enough to help out if you've got a project that doesn't fit the business plan model and things like that. Okay, I get it. Thank you. Thanks for that clarification. Okay, Liana, sorry.
If you want it brought up, you're just going to have to give us a couple minutes.
I think we have it. We're good.
Okay, you're good?
I'm good now. I understand what CAO Scoble is saying, and I understand what Councillor Peterson is saying. So no, that makes sense. I don't see the need for a 10th one as far as it does align with our strategic plan, even though capital project that I might suggest may not fit some of the others, it could fit that strat plan one, so that's good.
Well, if we're also adding a line within the capital budget for some of the council's projects, that may fit also within that line as well. So I believe that is the end of my presentations tonight.
Thank you very much.
So I think one more question for council. Are you happy with the weightings, or do you have any suggestions on changing the weightings?
So we would have some time to consider this, CAO Scoble, and offer some input.
Well, we could do it when it comes back. I believe we're hoping to bring it back next week before the recess, so we can start prioritizing the projects through the summer for the budget in the fall here. But you could wait till next week. It doesn't have to, if you want to make a suggestion next week.
How does council feel? Do you feel that next week is enough time for you to just focus on this one matrix aspect and see if you want to adjust weightings or suggest weighting changes? Do you folks feel you have enough time within a week? You're good? Everybody's okay with a week? Okay, we're good. All right. Thank you, Liana, for your, and Tom, for this long session on taxes and capital project matrices. Thank you very much. So we move now, I believe, we're now on the last item for our business in the public session is 5.7 CAO bylaw and municipal fees and charges policy, page 61.
So again, I'll introduce this and then Jonathan will take you through it. But so before you this evening is I guess what we're calling a modernized CAO bylaw. The outcomes are generally the same as the existing bylaw, but overall it is less specific, instead utilizing natural person powers and references to the Municipal Government Act. Of note, the existing bylaw allows the CAO to settle claims initiated by the town or against the town up to $500,000, whereas the proposed bylaw does not permit this for claims over $200,000 and until council is informed. We also took the $500,000 for emergency expenditures out. Urgent after-hour issues are well below this and typically within the budget for some of the small contingencies we do keep for situations like that. $500,000 is also getting into a disaster-type situation, in which case council would at minimum probably be calling a special council meeting and more likely declaring a state of local emergency, which opens up a different set of parameters for expenditures. On top of all that, this would be outside the approval limits I have as determined by council, so I couldn't act on a number of these prior existing clauses anyways, so there was actually some inconsistency in the bylaw. And the proposed bylaw does not require the CAO to provide report on budget preparation, annual reports, and variance reports, as these are already done. And, you know, in fact, a lot of it is stipulated in the budget principles policy should council decide to approve that at some point in the future. The existing bylaw also requires an annual report on all agreements, contracts, and legal and financial monetary settlements, which have been approved by the Chief Administrative Officer or designate. This has not been included in the proposed bylaw, as the CAO is empowered to do this, but the list is substantive and requires significant administrative time to prepare. And most claims are actually managed through insurance. So the cost, if any, to the town is the policy deductible. Council's been provided with regular reports or agenda items on legal issues that have come up. And so administration has no issue continuing with regularly updating council on, I guess, a more live update on legal issues as they arise instead of an annual report. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jonathan here now.
Thank you, CAO Scoble, and good evening, Jonathan, and welcome.
Thank you, Your Worship and Council, and thank you, CAO Scoble. I think CAO Scoble went through the CAO bylaw quite in depth there, so I'll just kind of give a high-level overview, if that's okay. So before you is a draft CAO bylaw, and accompanying that is a draft policy relating to municipal fees and charges. We thought we'd bring both of those together because they kind of are related. As you know, the Municipal Government Act does say that council must appoint a CAO. The CAO acts as the administrative head of the municipality and council's advisor on operations and political affairs. CAO is also responsible for the administration, operation, and financial and human resource management of the municipality. So, as CAO Scoble said, that there are significant changes to what's being proposed to council as what has been in place since 2018. Now that bylaw is dated, it's from 2018, and it is a good practice for each council to review, especially this bylaw, but most bylaws in the course of their term. So if council has any questions about the bylaw, we'd be happy to address them as you see. The one thing I'll also just want to discuss too is a little bit more about that policy. This being committee of the whole, we thought it'd be a good opportunity to present this policy to council, just to see if this is if we're on the right track, if this is something that council would like to see us kind of proceed with. This policy would allow the town to be a little bit more nimble when it comes to new programs that are being proposed, things of that nature, to allow us to set those fees. Of course, there would be an update to council during the budget deliberations every year. So on that note, if there's any discussion or questions of administration, I'd be happy to address
I
this.
have a question, and CAO Scoville, you can tell me if you've ever seen this in a CAO bylaw. And I'm looking into the far future, potentially, where there's a big change in council, and we have a new CAO possibly who's come in, and I'm just trying to paint a potential picture. How does council know if the stability of the organization as far as staff leaving, how does council ever know about that? And I don't want to handcuff a CAO, but sometimes in the past we've heard of payouts to staff, and we became aware of staff leaving, but we never knew how much was being done in severance things. Is that totally out of line for a council to be made aware of that? Or is that something that wouldn't necessarily appear in a CAO bylaw? How does council be in the loop as far as knowing how our staff retention is and staff who may be leaving? Am I making any sense?
Yeah, so, I mean, things like staff retention would be reported to council in that annual HR report that is done, I think, by March 31st. I can't remember what the exact date. Council would get that information. When you get into severances and things like that, you have to be very careful, because that is, that's an employee matter, and there's employment law things going on in that. I mean, severances, termination costs as a lump sum number are reported in the annual financials. I think the CAO could advise council when there's been a mutual parting of the ways, or whatever you want to call it, but I don't think that we could get into the specific termination.
Yeah, no,
payments.
I wouldn't want to get into specific individuals. But I guess from year to year, you're saying it's a budget item. So if we wanted to, we could say, okay, there was this much paid in payouts in 2027, and it's really decreased in 2028. So, council could look at that item in the overall budget and know as far as expenditures.
Yeah, I mean, you'd have to be careful drawing generalizations.
Right.
You would have to compare that with the HR report, I guess, and the retention or the turnover percentage and stuff like that.
Yeah,
So,
and the reason I asked was also for the benefit of new counselors, as far as, if you have staff turnover, sometimes you want to know a little bit more about what's going on. So there is that opportunity within the budget, within the expenditures part. Thank you. I have Councillor Langmaid and then Councillor Denise Peterson.
Thank you. I just wanted to actually thank you, Mayor, for bringing that up. It is something where it is an awkward situation where we need to walk the line, and I certainly don't want to ever depart from my lane, but I think it is important that council at least has a high-level knowledge of that information. We've seen in other municipalities where maybe that wasn't known and has come back to kind of bite other councils in the butt. That we've seen in recent reports and investigations. So I think it is important that we have some sort of high level, and I have confidence that we can see that through the budget. And
Are you saying I asked a good question?
I am saying
Thank
you
you.
asked a good question.
Thank you.
And I'm basically just saying ditto, Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Denise Peterson.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. I do really appreciate the succinctness of 22-23, and I think it's a big improvement. I was not, some people may know, I remember I was not pleased with the previous one. And I believe that restrictiveness is not useful in terms of operations ever. Off topic, but relevant to the HR conversation and the HR policy. I think we all understand, most of us have worked in some kind of business environments, and we understand non-disclosure agreements are sacrosanct in that world. It's really important for a number of reasons. But when I look at the CAO evaluation in terms of, and I think that's really key. When I looked at this, it was aligning the CAMA evaluation tools to the CAO bylaw, to what we currently use. To me, that was the thought process. And if there's gaps in that, I'd be happy to hear from anybody. But when I look at that, that's what I needed to know. The other thing, in terms of, separate from that, but in terms of HR policy, when we're looking at the health of an organization, HR has a lot to do with that in terms of, just beyond the financial and all of those things that we've discussed earlier, but retention, payouts, severance, extended disability, use of benefits, the percentage of budget put towards staff, the increases in that or the decreases in it, those are all things that I look at to measure health of organizational health. And so, I don't know, I don't see that should be reflected in the CAO bylaw. I don't think so.
I agree.
I think it's there. But I would really appreciate your insight in that. I saw it just in terms of, the few very succinct and general statements related to number 5. I see no problem with it. But if I'm missing something, I would like to hear it.
So, again, in the responsibilities laid out in the MGA, the employment is the purview of the CAO, right? So, in the interest of building and maintaining a healthy relationship with council, I've provided the HR report. It's not something that is required to be provided to council. And in fact, there's a number of legal opinions floating around that being directed to provide that by a council would be a constructive dismissal of your CAO, right? So, it's something that I do in good faith in the interest of maintaining the relationship between council and administration.
So that is the concern. So when you're sitting in a governance role, you have an obligation to the organization, and we don't have an so you're our only employee. So when we look at this, it has to cover that broadest possible scope. And so if as a counselor, you're sitting behind this desk and 3 years into the future, you saw that there was a 60% staff turnover, asking questions around that, regardless of whether you have an HR policy or not, to not ask questions to me would be would reflect very badly on a governance board. It would reflect very badly. So when I think about asking questions, it's not to know specifics. I don't care about names. I don't care about issues. I don't care about any of that. I care about the health of the organization in terms of the overall concept. If suddenly we're spending 70% of our total income on staffing as opposed to the 36% we currently spend, there would be a problem. Or if there was a trajectory that showed an enormous unexplained increase in consultants or legal fees or something like that, those are the kinds of things that I would ask anyway. And you can tell me if you think that those things would lend itself to a constructive dismissal. To me, they're just due diligence on the part of a council. I understand you have no right to interfere with your staffing and your supervisory role in that. But from the financial and healthful context of strategic planning and governance, I think there's a role for council.
Well, yeah, I mean, if that's the way you feel, I mean, I can't give you an answer. I have a legal opinion from prior municipalities that says you can't, but if you want to get a legal opinion, I mean, the fact of the matter is I volunteered this information now and provide it to council. So if you want to put it in a governance document, then I think you should get a legal opinion on that, because you may actually be setting yourselves up for a liability.
I'm not interested in putting into a governance document. I'm not interested in doing things that are illegal, but I am really interested in looking after the interests of the town. So I guess that's what I'm asking for direction on. You know, I'm not interested in a separate governance document, but I am interested in knowing it, and knowing the information that I stated.
So I'm a bit confused because I'm providing the information.
Yeah, no, I understand that. I understand that. So, and I'm not.
If I can bring it back
Yeah.
to my initial question,
Yeah.
I just wanted to know, you know, what opportunities does a council have? And you cleared it up for me by saying if we have concerns about costs of staff situations that are done through the course of a year running a town, we have the opportunity to see it in our budget, and we have the HR report that you are providing us. So
Yeah.
I'm content
So-
with
and
where
to
I
be
am.
It's in the annual financials, not the
Well, and
budget.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah.
And that's my point too, Your Worship. Like, I can look through a budget, and I can read that budget, and I can find the answers to these questions. You know, if I can't, I will ask. But I don't. I guess I'm confused on what the issue is. Like, I'm not understanding something for sure.
And I think I'm still looking at it through the lens of past council terms that I've been on. And it was problematic in one situation, but your answer as far as how we can find this information out, CAO Scoble is fine, it's in the financials, and your HR report that we get is absolutely fine with me. Thank you. Jonathan, did you have more that you? Councillor Wiley.
So I just wanted to just express my appreciation. So since I've been on council, I've wondered, I've been concerned with just the municipal fees, and they seem that they aren't reviewed, and so I really appreciate that this is going to be a part of the process moving forward, kind of an annual budget process where the fees are considered and looked at. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wiley.
Just, sorry, Worship, just on that note with that policy, is all council in agreement that they would like administration to move forward with that policy? Knowing that this is something kind of new to the municipality, but it is something that we're seeing in other municipalities as well.
No, I think it's good. Councillor Langmaid?
Thank you. Perhaps a question best answered by CAO Scoble. I was wondering if you could just walk me through 5.19 of the proposed. Could you walk me through the legalese of it, please? This bylaw has a very different grammatical feel than the other ones we've reviewed. It's much more legal, and I just want to understand. Section 5.15 refers to the things that the CAO must not do. Could you just put it in plain language for me so that I can understand? Like, explain it like I'm like, I don't know, I think the sayings explain it like I'm 5, but you could probably bring it up to probably 15.
Sorry, what, 5.15?
5.19 refers back to 5.15. I'm looking for just could you unlegalese 5.19 for me? Just some plain language so I can make sure that I understand what it's saying.
Yeah, well, it's 5.15A, sorry? Or I'm still a little lost.
5. Am I looking at the wrong document here?
No?
5.19.
Okay. Yeah, well, to be truthful, it was written by a lawyer, a very good lawyer I know, so
Yeah,
that's why
it's
it
very
sounds.
obvious that this was written by a lawyer. It's,
So what that says, it's saying, so 5.15, going back to that was the corporation, I think. Yeah, so it says, under 5.15, it says the CAO cannot, cause the town to basically become a shareholder in a corporation for profit or not. So 5.19 is saying, if council says that we should, that is I don't know, I might have to get back to you on that one.
yeah, if you could just get back, yeah, I read through it, it was saying, if council says to do, yeah, if you could get back to me just with what that means.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's fine, I'm not concerned with it, I just don't understand it.
So, Your Worship and Council, I think what that refers to is that so 5.15 limits what the CAO can do. 5.19 says that if council were to direct the CAO to act in contravention of 5.15, that action would be limited to whatever the resolution or bylaw that council enacted to direct the CAO to do so, essentially. But if there was something that were to come up that council wanted the CAO to act that would maybe contravene that, or maybe it would be a little bit gray or whatever, it would be limited to whatever that tool that council passed would be, whether it be bylaw or resolution. It wouldn't give now free rein to being contravention of 5.15 going forward.
I think I could probably still use
I think the difficulty with 5.19 when I looked at it is, I forget the name of the person who changed the governance directives for boards, but where they stated that everything would be stated in, instead of stating what you may do, you would state what you may not do. I forget who the person was who did that. But then when this one, in 5.19, it departs from that structure and it does both. And so I think that's where the difficulty of the interpretation comes in.
Okay, is everyone comfortable so far as what we're doing? What we've gone through? Okay. No, I don't believe there are any more questions. Thank you, Jonathan.
So thank you, Your Worship. So just knowing that we are going for summer break in August here, we'll probably bring this bylaw and policy back to council for further consideration in September.
Okay, thank you very much. That brings us to item 6, question and answer period. Councillor Mitzner.
I have a question. I've been approached by numerous people. When you pay your taxes online, why do you not get a receipt or something to indicate you paid it?
I don't have that answer right in front of me, but we can certainly look into that and we'll get you a response.
Councillor Wagoner.
Now, this isn't a question, it's just a bit of a statement. On Sunday, and again, I sent out an email to a few people on this. On Sunday, I attended the Canadian Strategies Group Stampede event with Kara and Jonathan. Everything seemed to go very well that night. We made a lot of good contacts, talked to a lot of people. I just wanted to thank Kara and Jonathan for guiding me and kind of holding my hand through the whole process on that. Also want to thank the marketing group, those Western shirts that we have. We had ministers, chiefs of staffs coming up to us because of our Western wear. So again, just a big thanks to everybody, and I think it was a great evening. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wagoner. Any other questions or statements? Councillor Peterson.
Your Worship, I would just like to congratulate the Wheatland Housing Management Body on 60 years of successful service. They had a celebration today, and thank you, Your Worship, for attending. Your attendance was noted and appreciated. I would also like to congratulate the CAO and staff of the Wheatland Housing Management Body. They've done an extraordinary job, especially through COVID era, and working with the new initiatives and proposals. And they were addressed by a member of ASHA tonight, and the statement made by them and the plaque presented to them was full of extraordinary praise and high regard for the operations and governance of the Wheatland Housing Management Body, Your Worship. So congratulations and kudos to that group, and congratulations to all of our taxpayers, past and present, who have provided a place for people. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Seeing that there are no others, all we need now is a motion to go into closed session. Councillor Langmaid.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd like to move that the committee move in camera to discuss items related to Section 24(1)A of the Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act at 9:29 p.m.
Thank you for that. All in favor? And we are going in camera. And to those watching at home, thank you and good night.